We live in a world where control is glorified. From a young age, we're taught to take control of our lives, to plan every step, to anticipate every outcome, to ensure that nothing falls through the cracks. Society tells us that the more we control, the more successful we'll be. We develop schedules, to-do lists, 5-year plans, and financial strategies, all in an effort to guarantee that life unfolds exactly how we envision it. And there's nothing wrong with planning or being diligent, but there comes a point for every person walking with God when we must realize that our human effort has limits. There are situations that arise, circumstances that evolve, and challenges that appear, things that are beyond what we can control, beyond what we can fix, and certainly beyond what we can understand. And it is in those moments, in the face of uncertainty, where surrender becomes not just a concept, but a necessity. You see, surrender isn't about giving up. It's about recognizing that there is a higher power, a divine wisdom, a strength that supersedes your own. Surrender is when you reach the end of yourself and find the beginning of God's grace, His mercy, and His power. It's that place where you say, Lord, I don't have the strength to fix this on my own. I don't have the insight to understand what's happening. I don't have the control I thought I had, but I trust you to handle what I cannot. We struggle with surrender because we are conditioned to believe that if we're not in control, things will fall apart. We fear that if we're not managing every detail, something will go wrong. But can I remind you that control is an illusion? The more we grasp at it, the more it slips through our fingers. No matter how much we plan, there are always variables outside our reach. There will always be situations that catch us off guard. There will always be decisions that we don't see coming and outcomes we can't predict. Control, as much as we crave it, is not the solution, it's the problem. The truth is, control leads to exhaustion. The more we try to hold everything together, the more we feel the weight of life's pressures. We carry burdens we were never meant to carry. We try to anticipate every twist and turn, but in doing so, we deprive ourselves of the peace that comes with trusting God. It's exhausting trying to play God, trying to be the author of your own destiny, when in reality we were never meant to play that role. Surrender, on the other hand, is liberating. It's the act of releasing the need to dictate every outcome, of letting go of the reins and allowing God to steer. But let me be clear, surrender is not passive. It doesn't mean we sit idly by doing nothing, expecting everything to magically fall into place. No, surrender is an active choice. It's a decision to trust in God's sovereignty and wisdom over our limited understanding. It's saying, I will do what I can, but I will trust God to do what I cannot. Think about this. When we surrender, we're acknowledging that God sees more than we see. While we're focused on one issue, one problem, one area of our lives, God sees the full picture. He sees how today's decisions will impact our tomorrow. He sees the ripple effect of every action, every conversation, every moment. And so when we surrender control, we're not giving up. We're giving it to the one who knows what's best for us better than we do. We also have to confront a difficult truth. Control is often rooted in fear. We're afraid that if we let go, things will spiral out of control. We're afraid that if we surrender to God's will, it won't match up with our desires. But let me tell you, surrendering to God is the safest decision you will ever make. Why? Because while you may not know the future, He does. While you may not understand why something is happening right now, He does. And He's working all things together for your good, even when you can't see it in the moment. And this is where faith enters the equation. Faith and surrender go hand in hand. To surrender without faith is just giving up. But to surrender with faith is an act of trust, an act of confidence in the character and power of God. It's saying, God, I may not know how this will turn out, but I trust that you do. It's declaring, God, even if it doesn't happen the way I planned, I believe you have a better plan. But let's be honest, surrender is uncomfortable. It challenges our pride. It forces us to confront the fact that we are not in control of everything. And for some of us, that's a hard pill to swallow. We've been so used to being the decision makers, the go-getters, the ones who make things happen. We like to call the shots. But the longer we cling to that false sense of control, the more we limit what God can do in our lives. Surrender requires humility. It requires us to admit that we don't know it all. It requires us to acknowledge that we are not all powerful, that we don't have all the answers. But in that humility, there is grace. The Bible says God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. When we humble ourselves and surrender, we position ourselves to receive the fullness of God's grace. Consider for a moment the countless stories of people in the Bible who had to surrender. Abraham had to surrender his son Isaac, trusting that God had a plan, even though it seemed incomprehensible. Moses had to surrender his life of comfort and control in Pharaoh's palace to lead the Israelites through the wilderness. Jesus himself in the Garden of Gethsemane surrendered his will to the Father, saying, "Not my will, but yours be done." Every act of surrender led to a greater revelation of God's power and purpose. When we refuse to surrender, we block the flow of God's blessings in our lives. We hold on so tightly to our plans, our desires, our way of doing things, that we leave no room for God to move. But when we release control, we make space for miracles. We make space for God to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we could ask or think. We make space for divine intervention, for supernatural breakthrough, for his hand to move in ways we could never orchestrate on our own. Surrender is not just about trusting God with the big things either. It's about the everyday moments. It's about surrendering the small decisions, the mundane tasks, the day-to-day worries. It's waking up in the morning and saying, "God, I give you this day. Guide my steps, direct my path." It's saying, "Lord, I don't know what challenges I'll face today, but I know that you're already there and I trust you to walk with me through them." Surrender is a daily practice. It's not something you do once and then move on from. It's a posture of the heart that you carry with you every single day. There will be moments when fear creeps in, when control tries to rear its head again. There will be times when you'll want to take back what you've already surrendered, but that's when you remind yourself, God is in control and I can trust him. One of the greatest challenges we face in our walk with God is learning to trust his timing. We live in a fast-paced world where everything is at our fingertips. Information, communication, even food. With just a few taps on our phones, we can have instant access to what we need. And because of this, we've grown accustomed to getting things immediately. We want quick results, instant gratification, and immediate solutions. But here's the thing, God doesn't operate on human timelines. His timing is different from ours, and that can be hard to accept, especially when we feel like we've been waiting for a long time. We pray for something, we believe for it, and we expect it to happen right away. And when it doesn't, when days turn into weeks and weeks into months and sometimes even years, we start to get frustrated. We question whether God heard our prayer. We wonder if he's forgotten about us, or worse, if he's saying no. But what we fail to realize is that God's delays are not his denials. Just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It simply means it's not the right time. Trusting in divine timing requires patience, and patience is something that most of us struggle with. We don't like waiting, especially when we don't understand the reason for the delay. We live in a culture of now, but God works on a different schedule. He operates on eternal time. While we are focused on the here and now, God sees the beginning, the middle, and the end. He knows the right moment to bring something into our lives. He knows when we are truly ready, even when we think we are. And sometimes the reason for the delay is not because God is withholding something from us, but because he is preparing us for what he is about to release. Think about that for a moment. How often do we think we are ready for something only to realize later that we were not? How many times have we prayed for a promotion, a relationship, a breakthrough, and when it didn't come, we were discouraged, only to look back and realize that if it had come at that moment, we wouldn't have been able to handle it. We wouldn't have been in the right place mentally, emotionally, or spiritually to receive it. God knows what we need, and He knows when we need it. Trusting in His timing means believing that He is not just interested in giving us what we desire, but in making sure that when we receive it, we are fully equipped to steward it well. Sometimes the delay is not a sign of God's absence, but a sign of His preparation. He is molding us, shaping us, pruning us, and strengthening us in the waiting period. We may not see it, but He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating things in our favor, aligning people, circumstances, and events to ensure that when the blessing comes, we are ready for it. But that waiting can be difficult. We grow impatient. We start to compare ourselves to others. We see people around us receiving the very thing we've been praying for, and we wonder, why not me? Why are they getting what I've been asking for? Why is God answering their prayers and not mine? But what we don't realize is that everyone's journey is different. Just because someone else is walking in their season of harvest doesn't mean that God has forgotten about your season. Your time is coming. God's promises for you are still alive, and they will come to pass, but they will come to pass in His timing, not yours. Trusting in divine timing means surrendering your timeline. It means letting go of your agenda and saying, God, I trust that you know what's best for me. I trust that you know when it's best for me. It's not easy. It requires faith. It requires letting go of control. It requires believing that even when you can't see what God is doing, He is still working. And sometimes that means waiting longer than we anticipated, longer than we feel we should have to. But in that waiting, there is purpose. The waiting period is not wasted time, it's preparation time. God is using the delay to refine you, to strengthen you, to build your character. He's teaching you patience, perseverance, and trust. He's developing qualities in you that you will need for the very thing you are praying for. Because here's the truth. Sometimes the greatest lessons we learn are not in the receiving, but in the waiting. It's in the waiting that we learn to trust God at a deeper level. It's in the waiting that we develop the kind of faith that is not dependent on what we see, but on who God is. And let's be honest, if everything we prayed for came immediately, would we even appreciate it? Would we value it in the same way? Would we be as grateful? There is something about the process of waiting that deepens our appreciation for the blessing when it finally arrives. There's something about walking through the valley, through the uncertainty, through the not knowing, that makes the fulfillment of the promise all the more sweet. When we've waited, when we've endured, when we've trusted God in the silence, the blessing carries more weight, more meaning, and more significance. Divine timing also teaches us to rely on God's wisdom. Sometimes we think we know what's best for us, but the truth is we don't. We see things from a limited perspective while God sees the whole picture. There may be things we desire that are not in our best interest, and in His mercy, God holds them back. Or there may be things we are praying for that we're not yet ready to receive. Trusting in God's timing means acknowledging that He knows us better than we know ourselves. It's recognizing that His plans are better, His ways are higher, and His thoughts are wiser. There's a beautiful story in the Bible that illustrates this truth. In the book of Genesis, we read about Joseph, a young man who had a dream from God. He saw himself in a position of great authority, ruling over others. But after receiving that dream, Joseph's life didn't immediately go in the direction he expected. Instead of stepping into his destiny right away, he was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused by his master's wife, and thrown into prison. Years went by, and it seemed like the dream would never come to pass. But Joseph never lost faith in God's timing. He trusted that God was working even in the most difficult and confusing circumstances. And after years of waiting, after enduring hardship and trial, Joseph was finally elevated to a position of authority, second only to Pharaoh. He became the very leader he had dreamed of being. But the timing was perfect. If Joseph had stepped into that role any sooner, he wouldn't have been ready. The waiting had prepared him. The years of suffering and patience had molded him into the man he needed to be to fulfill God's plan. The same is true for us. We may have dreams, desires, and prayers that we are waiting on, and the waiting may feel long, even unbearable at times. But God is not slow in keeping his promises. He is faithful. And just as he brought Joseph's dream to fulfillment, he will bring yours to fulfillment as well. It may not happen on your timetable, but it will happen on God's. And when it does, it will be right on time. We must also remember that divine timing is not just about us. Sometimes God is working out details in the lives of others before he brings about the fulfillment of our own prayers. There may be people who need to be positioned, circumstances that need to align, or hearts that need to be prepared before God can release the blessing. We don't always see what's happening behind the scenes, but God is orchestrating things in ways we could never imagine. Trusting in divine timing means believing that God's plan is not just about you, it's about his greater purpose. There's a verse in the Bible that says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths." That's one of those scriptures that we can quote, we can say it, we can even teach it, but living it, walking it out daily, that's a whole different story. Because as human beings, we naturally lean on what we know. We lean on our own understanding because that's what feels secure to us. We lean on what we've been taught, on what we can rationalize, on what we can figure out. We trust what we can see, what we can touch, what we can analyze, what we can predict. But the truth is, there are times when our understanding falls short. Our human wisdom, as vast as it might seem in our own eyes, is limited, it's flawed, it's incomplete. But God's wisdom is infinite, perfect, and beyond anything we can comprehend. Think about that for a moment. God's wisdom is not confined to time. He's not just dealing with today's problems or today's concerns. God sees all of eternity, past, present, and future at once. While we're trying to figure out how to make it through the next hour, the next day, or the next week, God has already mapped out the entire course of our lives. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows the paths we will take, the challenges we will face, and the decisions we will make. His wisdom is not limited by our circumstances, and it's certainly not limited by our understanding. But here's the challenge. When life throws things at us that we don't understand, when we encounter situations that don't make sense, we often default to our own reasoning. We try to make sense of it with our limited perspective, and when we can't, we start to question God. Why did this happen? Why didn't this work out? Why am I going through this? And because we can't see the full picture, we can't always grasp God's wisdom in the moment. But that's where faith comes in. That's where trusting in God's wisdom over our own understanding becomes essential. We need to realize that there are things God allows in our lives that we will never fully understand. And that's okay. We're not supposed to understand everything. If we understood everything, there would be no need for faith, no need for trust, no need for reliance on God. But the very nature of walking with God means that we will encounter situations that require us to lay down our own wisdom, to set aside our need to figure everything out, and to trust that God, in his infinite wisdom, knows exactly what he's doing. There's something comforting in that, isn't there? The knowledge that you don't have to have all the answers, the peace in knowing that it's okay not to know. You don't have to carry the burden of understanding every detail of your life because God is already carrying that for you. His wisdom is like a master architect weaving together the tapestry of your life in ways that you could never imagine. While you're looking at one small thread, one small piece of the puzzle, God is designing the entire masterpiece. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. It's not easy to let go of our need to understand. We want answers. We want clarity. We want to know why things happen the way they do. We want to see the purpose behind the pain, the reason behind the delay, the lesson behind the trial. But there are times when God, in his wisdom, chooses to withhold those answers from us, not because he's trying to frustrate us, but because he's trying to grow us. He's trying to stretch our faith, to deepen our trust in him. God's wisdom is not always revealed in the way we expect. Sometimes he answers us in ways that don't align with our desires or our understanding. We pray for one thing and he answers in a completely different way. We ask for a door to open and instead he closes it. We seek clarity and sometimes he allows us to walk through a season of confusion. But here's the key. Just because God's wisdom doesn't match our expectations doesn't mean it's not perfect. His wisdom surpasses our understanding. Look at the story of Job. Here's a man who had everything, wealth, family, health, only to lose it all in a series of devastating events. Job's friends tried to rationalize it, tried to explain it with their human understanding. They thought Job must have done something wrong to deserve such suffering. But Job in his heart knew that he had walked uprightly before God. He didn't understand why these things were happening to him, but he continued to seek God. And in the end, God never gave Job the specific reasons why he had gone through such trials. But God did reveal his majesty, his power, and his wisdom to Job. And that revelation was enough for Job to trust in God's wisdom, even without all the answers. God's wisdom often calls us to trust him in the midst of uncertainty, in the midst of unanswered questions. He calls us to trust him when the way forward isn't clear, when the situation doesn't make sense, and when we feel lost. And it's in those moments that we have to remind ourselves that God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. He is working out things on a level that we can't even begin to fathom. Think about how many times in your own life you've gone through something that made no sense at the time. Maybe a job you didn't get, a relationship that didn't work out, an opportunity that fell through. In the moment, it might have felt like a loss, like God wasn't hearing your prayers. But looking back, you can see that God was protecting you, guiding you, and redirecting you to something better. That's his wisdom at work. And that's why we can't rely solely on our own understanding. Our perspective is too limited. We see things from a ground level view while God sees things from a heavenly perspective. We're focused on what's happening right now, but God sees what's coming. He knows what's around the corner, what's in the next chapter, and what's on the other side of the storm. So when we lean on our own understanding, we're leaning on something fragile, something incomplete. But when we lean on God's wisdom, we're leaning on something unshakable, something eternal. God's wisdom also requires us to trust him when life takes unexpected turns. There are moments when we think we have it all figured out, when we think we know exactly how things are going to unfold, and then life throws us a curveball. A diagnosis we didn't expect, a job loss, a broken relationship. Suddenly the future we envisioned is no longer reality. And in those moments we're tempted to question, God, why? Why did this happen? What am I supposed to do now? But here's the thing, just because your plans have changed doesn't mean that God's plans for you have changed. Just because you didn't see it coming doesn't mean that God didn't. He's not surprised by the unexpected. In fact, He's already accounted for it in his plan for your life. God's wisdom sees what we cannot. While we're fixated on the immediate, God is preparing us for the long term. He's more concerned with developing our character than giving us what we think we need in the moment. And sometimes that means allowing us to go through seasons of uncertainty, seasons of waiting, or seasons of discomfort. But we can trust that in his wisdom, he is working all things together for our good. There's a depth to God's wisdom that we will never fully comprehend this side of heaven. We may catch glimpses of it. We may experience moments where everything falls into place and we see how God's hand has been guiding us all along. But there will also be times we have to walk by faith and not by sight, trusting that God knows what he's doing even when we don't. Trusting in God's wisdom over our own understanding also means accepting that his definition of success may look different from ours. We may think that success is tied to achievements, accolades, or material gain, but God's wisdom measures success in terms of our spiritual growth, our obedience, our faithfulness, and our relationship with him. What may look like a failure in human terms could very well be a victory in God's eyes. What we perceive as a setback may actually be a setup for something greater that we can't see yet. God's wisdom calls us to surrender our desire for control. It calls us to let go of our need to have everything figured out. It requires us to admit that we don't know it all, that we don't have all the answers, and that we can't always rely on our own intellect or reasoning to navigate life's complexities. But in that surrender and that letting go, we find freedom. We find peace. We find rest in the knowledge that we don't have to carry the weight of trying to figure everything out, because God is already in control. When we embrace God's wisdom, we open ourselves to his guidance, his provision, and his perfect timing. We may not always understand his ways, but we can trust that they are good. We can trust that he is for us, that he loves us, and that he is leading us on the path that will ultimately bring us closer to him. In conclusion, putting everything in God's hands is not a one-time decision, but a daily act of surrender, trust, and faith. It's a choice to release control over our lives, to recognize that God's wisdom far surpasses our own, and to trust in his divine timing, even when we don't understand the reasons behind his delays or redirections. When we let go of our limited understanding and place our hope in the one who sees the full picture, we position ourselves to experience his peace, his provision, and his purpose for our lives. We may face trials, uncertainties, and moments where we feel lost, but we can rest assured that God is working all things together for our good. His wisdom, his timing, and his plans are perfect. So let's choose every day to put everything, our dreams, our worries, our challenges, and our future into his capable hands, trusting that he will lead us, guide us, and bring us into the fullness of his promise in his perfect way. Wow.